Hi, everyone. I think Sherry asked if I would lead the meeting, so I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to arrive. But first, I wanted to say a big thank you to RCD for, can everyone hear me? I see, okay, you're good. I want to say a big thank you to RCD and to Sherry for organizing all this, RCD for coming and talking to us about this, and Sherry for pulling this agenda together and the team to speak. And then I want to say thank you to both Steves who are going to tell us about their personal experience with these grants. The goal is to keep having more of these community meetings that where people who have experience and stuff that's, you know, what many of us want to do, can tell us about what it is. I had a conversation today with a guy who's lost, I think he said 15,000 trees on his property last year, Eric, or a couple of years ago, and has been working on restoring the property and dealing with the trees, and has a couple of these air curtain incinerator things that don't pollute, so that you don't have to haul the trees to the dump. Anyway, who's had all kinds of experience with that, and I'm going to see about putting together a meeting for that, because I know a lot of our neighbors have land that's been burned up and need help in knowing what to do with all the trees.
Elaine, this is Steve Rasmussen, and Eric is actually here with me, so he's listening and will follow along with everything.
Oh, good. Oh, great, Eric. I hope you don't mind me signing you up to talk to us.
Fine. Just fine.
He has a lot of experience that I think people would really find valuable. So I would urge you to have a follow-up with Eric talking about his experience. Okay.
Well, I want to say, introduce everybody. So we're a few minutes, I think 3 minutes in, we can go ahead and roll. I'm Elaine Honig. I'm on the FSC Liaison Committee for the board for NCFF. And really amazing committee with quite a few of us on it. And the more FSCs we get, the more liaisons we're going to need. So it's a good active committee. And so in the interest of helping landowners find grant programs to help with wildfire fuel abatement, we have two experts on this who are going to talk to us with, management of private forested lands. And that is from RCD and the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is the acronym NRCS. And they're going to help facilitate. So we've got Amanda Benton from RCD Forestry Program Manager, and Evelyn Denzin from NRCS District Conservationists. And they're both going to talk to us about these individual grants for private landowners. So that way you don't have to get together with 10 of your neighbors. If you've got a decent chunk of land and you need some money, these guys are going to tell us about those programs. So Amanda and Evelyn, I'm going to go to speaker view so I can find you. Amanda and Evelyn, can you all, I guess, make some noise and we can find you? And then can everyone else who is not speaking go on mute so we don't accidentally pick up your background noise? And then I find for big groups like this, if you go to speaker view, then the person who's speaking, you can see them and you don't have to find them amongst all the different little tiles. So I see Evelyn, and then Amanda I see. Okay, great. So Amanda and Evelyn, do you guys want to get started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Amanda Benton, and I am, as Elaine said, the Forestry Program Manager for the Napa Resource Conservation District. I hope you are all very familiar with what the Resource Conservation District is and does. I see a lot of very familiar names and faces on this, which is exciting and fun. We it feels like just started a forestry program in Napa, but COVID timekeeping is strange. So it's been a little over 2 years now, and obviously timely. So we're still trying to figure out what all of the needs are for forestry, and that's why these sorts of meetings are very important. The forestry program for the RCD, I will say, is very forest health focused, and fire is a huge component of forest health, but we are not just focused on fire, whatever, mitigation, reduction, anything. It's the focus is forest health as opposed to just fire, which is one of those small distinctions that ends up meaning a great divergence down the road sometimes. But yeah, so that's my role and gig. Do you want to intro, Evelyn?
Sure. I'm Evelyn Denzin. I am with the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We're an agency within U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I've been here really about the same amount of time Amanda has. I honestly think we started about the same week back in 2019. And NRCS has been doing some forestry work, I'd say, in Napa probably since the 2017 fires. I'm not sure that we had a lot of forestry contracts prior to that. I think really having those fires hit the county hard is what triggered people to go, we need to do something more to manage our forest. But similar to what Amanda says, we're also about forest health. Really, all of the forestry projects that we would help fund, one of the primary things is improving the forest health, the plant health. Reducing wildfire hazard is another part of it. And we don't do any work within 100 feet of structures. So the defensible space right around structures is still really up to the landowner to do. And then the work that we would help with is more on the forest land part of it, not what's right around the house.
Yeah. And I will say, like, back when we all went into the office regularly, Evelyn and I shared office space. The NRCS and the RCD folks share an office space. So we work very closely. A lot of the programs that we're going to talk about are things that we have, talked about together and consulted about, and want to, make sure we are working cohesively together. Unfortunately, we are in the middle of a server migration, and all of the everything's will be on the cloud. And so I don't have access to any of my slides or presentations. I was hoping it would be up by now. So I don't have visuals to share with folks, but I will just tell you a bit, and I can send NCFF some links to things that they can get out once I can get access to those. One of the sort of main programs that the RCD is working with, helping administer whatever right now, is called NBFIP, and that's NBFIP. I'm hoping some of you have heard of that already. And the goal of that program is financial assistance for forest health management activities. So there are a few different activities that are covered: timber stand improvement, fuel reduction, pruning, helping sort of secure evacuation routes. But it is for small-ish landowners. We're targeting projects in the 1 to 500 acre property size. The most successful projects seem to be running around 20 acres. It's in concert with what was called Rebuild North Bay, and they've done a bit of branding, and now I think they're calling themselves After the Fire. And I will drop a link to that in the chat, because there's a really good website that describes what that program is all about. But we are targeting the Napa, Lake, Sonoma, and Mendocino areas with that one. And what we've discovered is that fire doesn't care about geopolitical boundaries. So we're doing a lot of different programs, grant programs, financial assistance, anything in partnership with our neighbors, because as many of the Sonoma County fires can come from Sonoma County or thank you, Evelyn, to Napa from Sonoma County, or vice versa. So it really does help to have the partnerships working across what we have established as boundaries, and the fire doesn't care. The program is called NBFIP, North Bay Forest Improvement Program. And it's a Prop 68 funded program, so it can happen in conjunction with federal assistance dollars, but not with other state assistance dollars. So if you have, you know, a CFIP, which is the California Forest Improvement Program, they all sound the same after a while, then, you know, the footprints of projects have to be different, and all of that can be established with a, you know, land visit, like a site visit. So I can do site visits. Bill Birmingham, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with and is another RCD employee, is also able to do preliminary site visits. The other program that he and I are working on right now is called the Emergency Forest Restoration Program. And that's that's a federal program, and it was administered through the Farm Service Agency, but we're using NRCS practices and protocols to sort of establish, you know, what could be done post-fire on different places, you know, just on different landscapes, and sort of, you know, how we can go about restoring, not necessarily bringing back to what it was, because often what it was not, you know, the healthiest or most resilient landscape, but restoring to healthy forest conditions post fire. And that program is like established because the Glass and LNU Lightning Complex were designated as federal emergencies. So that program is happening right now. We had an application session. It was a very short window. I think it closed at the end of August, and we've got like 45 different applications we're working through on that one. And then there are more things. I hate to be a teaser about it, but there are more things in the works. We have a program coming up that we're calling, oh, it's too many acronyms after a while, but the Regional Cooperative Partnership Plan, RCPP or something. And I think Evelyn knows even more about that one, but we're, you know, again, big picture, trying to work with like all counties in the LNU CAL FIRE unit to get, you know, some real financial assistance dollars and also capacity building dollars in the area to try and help more programs. I feel like I've been rambling, so I'm gonna let Evelyn talk for a little while.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
So how do you, so what I'm hearing from you is there is money, you all have money out there. So I'm a landowner, I got 20 acres. I've either haven't caught on fire yet, or I caught on fire. You know, my property either caught on fire or hasn't. You have money and programs that I can go to you, make an appointment, you'll come out and meet with me as the landowner, and then help me know which program is the right fit for what I want to do, and then help me pursue it. Is that
yeah, I mean, you know, it all sounds better than I feel like it ends up being often. There are so many little, you know, things, boxes that need to be checked and qualifications that need to be met. The first program I talked about, the one the links in the chat, has a 6-month application window. So we just closed a round in September, and we'll be taking applications now for this 3rd round through the end of April.
And how much money are we talking?
So, you know, it's got a $200,000 cycle. So each cycle, we're trying to fund projects in 4 different counties with the total not exceeding $200,000.
So that's all you have. You have $200K to spend in 4 counties,
or
you have $200,000 to $200,000K to spend per project.
In 4 counties.
In 4 counties. So look,
per funding cycle.
And how many funding cycles a year? 2?
Just 2.
2.
We're you know, in talks with CAL FIRE for, it is not for further, you know, funding for that program. It was sort of positioned as a like trial run. We were going to see how it worked, and what we're discovering is that it was a ton of work to get going, but having put in that effort, we don't want to lose that momentum. We have applications that we aren't able to fund each round because we don't have the funding pool. So we are applying for more, and it's looking good, but I mean, I'm sure at some point we're going to need, you know, support to say like, yes, we have more applications that we want to fund for this.
And what question is, so is the After the Fire program most only for disadvantaged communities, or can anyone apply for it?
It's open to everyone. It's open pre and post fire. Like, it, you know, it doesn't have to be burned, and it certainly isn't just disadvantaged communities. The aspect of it that is only for disadvantaged communities, as established by like the California Census Bureau, whatever, is the technical assistance. So the things that are necessary to have a successful application for that program are components of a forest management plan. And we don't have funding for me to write a forest management plan for that application. So the landowner will need to, find that information or get help to write those plans if they're not a disadvantaged community resident.
Okay. And then a quick question, what's the average grant size you've been giving out? So if the average acreage is 20 acres, how much money does the average 20-acre parcel bring in from you all?
Yeah, the sweet spot for that one, the projects seem to be about 20 acres and the grants run between 20 and 40,000.
Okay.
So those are the project sizes. And it's paying, and that website is extensive. It's got lots of little rabbit holes to go down, unfortunately, but there's a PDF called Cap Rates, and it describes sort of what we will pay for each of the activities. So it's like 60% of what we think this activity should cost someone. I saw another question pop up, but I didn't get a chance to read it.
North Bay Foundation, and how does it relate to RCD? What's the North Bay Foundation and how does it relate to RCD and the US Ag agencies?
So yeah, the Rebuild North Bay was, I'm going to get their history a little bit wrong. I'm sure their website does a better job, but my understanding is that they were established in Sonoma County after the Tubbs fire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm getting nods. And have been working on various projects throughout. What they did for us, for the Lake, Sonoma, Mendocino, and Napa RCDs with this project, this grant program, is they are the fiscal sponsor. There might be a better term for it, but I'm gonna go with fiscal sponsor. So they front that $200,000 per funding cycle, and then they wait the 6 to 9 months it takes CAL FIRE or California, state of California, to reimburse them. And the landowners who are actually having to expend the money much faster will get reimbursed faster.
Okay.
So
and is that how it works? So I've got 20 acres. I'm going to spend $40K on doing fuel load reduction, which is, and I then get out, pay for it, and you all come back and reimburse.
Right.
After I jump through lots and lots of hoops that the Steves are going to talk about. Okay.
Yeah, the application process is also on the website. You can look through, apply online, am I eligible, all of those little steps. And you can see the questions that are necessary. The other thing that's on that website, which is really useful, is Jason, the forester from the Sonoma RCD, went through and recorded a video of him filling out an application. So I highly encourage everyone to watch that video. And then we did a Q&A after that video, and I think that's posted too. So yeah, I definitely encourage everyone to watch that. The next funding cycle.
And what's the name of the website?
It is called afterthefireusa.org. If you have access to the chat, it's the first link in the chat on this Zoom
Thank
call.
you.
Got it. And then Will Becker has a question. Per parkscalifornia.org, it looks like we don't qualify it as disadvantaged. If so, what's the match rate?
The match rate for non-disadvantaged is 60%. So 60% of that cap rate. I have been able to fund an additional project that I didn't think I was going to get to because that person was willing to accept 40% match. So that's an option if you can. It doesn't necessarily disqualify anyone, but I talked to that landowner and he was more than happy. So.
And I have a quick question. In terms of your applications, then each funding cycle,
Sure.
What percentage do you think you get? What percentage do you think get funded versus, because it sounds like there's a lot of need and not a lot of dollars to spread around. So how many? What percentage do you think get funded, and what determines the fund? Is it the first to the gate, or is it the neediest, or how do you determine where you're going to
Yeah, we have a ranking system, and that is also on the website. So it's not a secret. We're not trying to hide what's worth points to anyone. There is a, which questions are worth how many points, sort of what the answers would be. So, the highest scoring points are the applications that we will be most likely to fund. That being said, the applications have not had an even distribution. So we have just closed our second round of funding. I was able to award all 4 Napa County applicants. Sonoma County had 20 applicants. They had more the first round, so we only awarded, I think, 2 out of Sonoma County this time. A few out of Mendocino County, and Lake County didn't have any applicants. So next round of funding, we're hoping some applicants from Lake County, and we will award some there. So, equality and equity and all of these things are so hard. And in the end, as we all know, 200,000 is just not a huge chunk of change for this kind of work. It is expensive. We, especially if there are other projects going on, we encourage folks to keep receipts because CAL FIRE might want to see them down the road, but that doesn't mean that the work couldn't be done in-house. So, we're very conscious that we're not, these aren't money-making opportunities for anyone. And I really don't think it's an issue, but, the accountants are always worried about that. So, if you're hiring someone, obviously keep receipts. If you're doing the work yourself, keep a log of the amount of hours or something, but it's not an issue right now.
And then I have there was a question that came in that says, what if you've already spent the money on fuel reduction? So let's say someone went back 6 months ago and did a whole lot of fuel reduction. Can they come in now and apply for grant money, or do those 2 things need to be kind of in tandem?
Yeah, unfortunately, the requirements of that grant, we have to show sort of before and after pictures, and we have to be out there and verifying. I mean, it sucks. I will freely admit that, and we all know it, that like, I would love to be able to just pay people for doing the right thing when it needed to be done. But so many of these programs, I don't know a single one of these programs that will pay folks for work that was already done.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, the same is true for the USDA programs. And it's hard because it's slow from the time you apply to where we have to complete an environmental review to where you're allowed to start. And when you're working in areas with dead trees, you don't want to work 3 years after they've been sitting there dead. It's dangerous. You want to get in there soon. So it's a tough situation, but that's where also maybe you already treat the most strategic, locations along roads or something like that that really matter. And then you apply for funding for something else that's a little farther in.
And what is the lead time different than RCD versus USDA? Does the USD have longer lead time? RCD, it sounds like maybe you guys can be a little more nimble, or is it, are both of the programs 2 or 3 years?
I'll just speak a little bit. In BFIP, we're still very much ironing out those wrinkles. So we've only done 1 funding cycle, and or 2 funding cycles at this point, but we haven't even closed one. So after once the contract is signed by the landowner and after the fire, then there'd be a 12-month completion time. So we're not doing hundreds of acres because these are 1-year projects. But the, getting started really at this point depends on the landowner. The folks I'm working with, we're trying to get contracts going, and it's just getting a hold of everyone, and it's this time of year too. But EQIP, which is the federal program that Evelyn's going to talk most about, I think, is just a little bit of a different thing. So I should let Evelyn talk about that, and then maybe I'll answer more questions after, because I see more coming in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a slideshow to go over a bit about our programs, but I'd say with EQIP, usually within the first year, people are starting their work, and then we sort of spread it out over a few years. So we have treatment units. So when you're done with one section, you can get paid on that section, then you go to the next one. So you're also not waiting for the entire area that you contracted to get done before you get paid. So you can get paid in pieces.
So, okay. And then how do your programs differ from RCD? Are they bigger? bigger swaths of
We
land?
do have more money, but our fund pools are more also at a regional or state level. And so some of them, like we have a catastrophic fire recovery fund pool in California for NRCS. And that gets, I think, like $3 to $5 million a year, but that's for the entire state. So it's also, you know, Sierra Hill, you know, landowners whose forest is burned. So, but we have funded all of our fire, you know, recovery and forestry projects, at least the past 2 years. And so sometimes there'll be some that maybe rank lower for some reason, and they might not get selected in our first batch. But usually the state somehow is reworking, you know, their budgets and putting money together, and maybe right at the end of our fiscal year, they're going, oh, hey, we can still fund another few projects. And so I think pretty much all of our forestry ones have been funded. There was just one I can think of that was just to do biochar production that didn't get funded, but everything else has gotten funded. And if anything, we more struggle to maybe fund all of our cropland or rangeland applications.
So what sort of work, so what kind of applications are you getting when you say they're all getting funded? Can you tell us a little bit about a typical project so that we know, I know, like, okay, I've got a chunk of land. Am I your candidate, or do I, you know, where do I go? Do I go to Amanda? Where do I focus? How does
So we have a lot of applicants, like you described. Someone owns 20 acres of forest land. They might have their house on it. Maybe a couple of acres are exempt because they're sort of somewhat developed or something. But if they have 10, 15 acres of forest land, they can apply. We would go out and sort of talk with them, do a site visit, do a brief forest inventory, and come up with a plan. Amanda talked about the forest management plan. So we can, on smaller properties, NRCS staff can do that inventory and write that forest management plan. On a larger property greater than 50 acres, it actually has to be done by a registered professional forester. And so then there's sort of two options. You can actually get some funding from NRCS to hire a registered professional forester, but it usually adds a whole nother year to the process, because first you have a contract with us to get the forest management plan done. And then you come back with that plan and apply the next year to actually implement the forest management plan. You can also just hire a registered professional forester on your own and get that plan written.
And how long does that, how much money are you typically giving out? Is it a match? And how does that work? And then well, like, what's a forest plan cost?
Yeah. So the forest management plans, honestly, I don't know for sure. What I do know is that our NRCS rates don't cover very much. So we had some people this past year who just went on their own and got that plan done because it wasn't worth the added wait time to them to maybe get $1,500 from NRCS towards the registered professional forester. Now, as far as the actual implementation, I can give you some examples of what our rates are. They're by the acre, they're set rates depending on that activity. And for example, and I should probably open up the slideshow and maybe go through it from the start, and I might get to this. Let's see, let me go about sharing my screen here. Just a minute, sorry, I'm getting there. Are you guys seeing the slideshow?
It says, Evelyn, yes, we are now.
Okay, great. So just a short presentation on our different financial incentives programs, and we call them financial incentives and not cost share because it's not a specific rate. It's more that our state and really national NRCS office has set these rates, and at one point in time they may have been based on, you know, attempting to pay 50% of what the cost would be, but that might not be true, especially here in Napa. So let's see. Okay, so our conservation programs, we have technical and financial assistance, and we can help agricultural producers address what we call natural resource concerns. In a forest, this could be wildfire hazard, plant health, plant pest pressure, which would be like weed problems, French broom. And we work with private landowners first to develop conservation plans or forest management plans, and they should really consider the needs of the landscape and the objectives of the customer or the landowner. So a lot of it is our conversations with you to find out what your goals are, because everyone's site is different and everyone's goals for what they want to do with their site is different. All of our programs are voluntary. So, you know, they're not regulatory programs, but if someone does need to, you know, get a permit to do something, then of course they're required to get that permit, but we're not the ones managing that. Our two main programs that we use with landowners are called Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. Couple of differences between those. With EQIP, you can just apply for a certain piece of your land. You don't need to include all of the property that you manage or own. Whereas with CSP program, you're actually required to enroll all of the land that's in your control. EQIP programs just last as long as the project takes to be implemented. Usually that's between 2 to 4 years. CSP projects are all 5-year contracts. In both cases, you're required to start a conservation practice within the first year. And the only case that might not be true in is if our whole environmental review process took more than a year, or there's some reason why you really couldn't get started in the first year of the project.
And what's the average size of your project, of the projects that come through you?
So good question. With the forestry ones, I say the small end is at 15 to 20 acres. And then we have some people applying to treat probably 100 acres or so on the larger upper end, you know, maybe 1 to 200 acres. The reality is that probably around that 100 and some odd acres, they'll cap out on our payment caps will be exceeded. And so there's only so much that they can actually include if they, you know, if they want to get paid for it with us. And so each USDA farm bill, which is a legislation that passes every 5 years, has a farm bill cap for these programs. And so we actually have to add up if, you know, if someone applied with us several years, you know, over a couple of different projects, if they're all funded through the same farm bill, it adds up to this cap. So for EQIP, it's, I think, around $450,000. For CSP, they're allowed to have $200,000.
So you can, I'm sorry, so it's, you said $200,000 is the most they give out for the CSP.
For CSP.
And how much for EQIP? You said 40,000?
450,000.
450. So if I've got, I'm just making this up. If I've got 150 acres, I stand a chance of you all helping me out with 450K to work on land. Okay, great. That's good.
What happens to those contracts if the property is sold?
Elaine,
Mhm.
Steve, and Evelyn, sorry, this is Steve Rasmussen. Just we'll start getting big eyes about this. You know, I just need to point out that, for instance, I spoke with Mary Dugan, who is in charge at the state level for the EFRP program, and we discussed the reimbursement because it wasn't even known by Bill Birmingham and RCD what the reimbursement rates were going to be. And the reimbursement rate right now, if I'm clearing and removing debris from my land under EFRP, and I have an application in that we're working on the plan for, is $750 per acre for cutting down burned trees and disposing of them. So to get to $450,000, you would have to have, you know, 100,000 acres, or, you know, so don't get big eyes, because it's costing me, I'm doing the work under EQIP actually, and it costs me $5,000 to $20,000 per acre to actually do the tree removal, the cutting in the burned areas based on the size of the trees. If I have Doug fir, it's costing me $1,500 a tree, and I might have 10 of them in an acre. So that's $15,000 there. If it's relatively small brush, manzanita and other things, I can get the work done for $5,000. I've been doing enough of this to know how much it costs to do the work. But no matter how much it costs to me, my max payment under EFRP and also under EQIP, because EFRP is using the NRCS EQIP rates for the EFRP program, is $750 an acre. So I can talk more when it's my turn to speak, but I just, you know, before we get off the rails in terms of big eyes about what the size of these programs are, this is the potential money that you could possibly get, but it's not what you're getting for the treatments, because treatment describe maximum allowance. And so they talk about giving you 75% cost, but it's not the cost that you have, it's what some national table says should be the cost if you were, for instance, you know, mowing you know, shrubs with a machine in Iowa. So that's factored into this. It's a national rate that RCD and NRCS are obligated to use. So I'll talk more about my experience with this, but the amount of money is way less, you know, maybe a tenth of what it actually costs to do the work in this rugged terrain in this area, unless perhaps, you know, you're just on a flat area and you can kind of bulldoze everything and make a big pile and burn it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm surprised that, yeah, you know, and we don't administer EFRP, so I don't know what they're using, but when we generally do a contract with EQIP, we include two different practices, what we call forest stand improvement, which last year was paying $1,408 an acre. And then we also have a practice called woody residue treatment, which covers the management of the debris. And that one in burned areas was around $700 an acre. So we bundle those generally. If there's trees to get cut down, we do the forest stand improvement and residue treatment.
That's right, and so it's TBD in terms of how you can bundle these things and what people, you know, what Bill Birmingham from RCD is going to sort of advise us and so on. But it doesn't come to, it still doesn't come to $5,000 to $20,000, which is, you know, from talking to other people doing this work, are the real costs of doing it. So depending on the type of land that you have, maybe we can get to $2,000. It would be great if we could get to $2,000. You know, I've asked Mary Dugan to kind of, and they're open. They have the authority to actually introduce rates at the state level, and are open to doing that. She had a conversation with her higher ups. And so, you know, hopefully if we work all together and kind of help people understand the realities of what is going on in this region and the rugged terrain that we're dealing with, and the costs that we have in terms of labor and other kinds of costs in this area, we can get these rates higher. But you are capped, and it's important, I think, to discuss those caps on a per acre basis, or if you're working along a road per foot basis, or per, you know, there's various caps that determine actually how much you're going to get. And as you know, Evelyn, you know, many people who you've gone through the assessment process with, at the end of the day, I think as Amanda said, you know, as you said, saying, you know, for $5,000, this isn't worth it if you don't have, you know, if you can't attack the work efficiently.
Yeah, yeah, and
so yeah, thank you for all those comments, Steve. It's expensive, and like you say, those rates can be changed. I've asked, you know, last year, some of the people who were doing projects, I asked if they would share with me how much it costs, because honestly, if the more receipts like that we can send up to our state leadership, the more reason they have to push to raise those rates. But they have to be able to justify that it really costs that much more to do the work.
And they've asked me to do that, and I'm doing that for the EQIP grant, because I can substantiate that it's going to be more like between $5,000 and $10,000 per acre for that work.
Okay. And then one other thing to note is that our programs are really geared around like the non-commercial harvest. So we're not intending that people are cutting down the larger size trees with our programs. It's really for, say, up to 8-inch diameter, maybe 10 or 12-inch diameter. But when you get into the larger diameter trees, then that's more of an actual timber harvest or a salvage timber harvest in areas that burn. And so that's where our programs are really not designed to cover the cost of doing that work. And unfortunately, that's the situation a lot of landowners in Napa are in, that they have these large Doug firs that are standing dead that they need to take out. And it hasn't always, from what I've heard, worked out to even do a salvage timber harvest, because that has cost more than the lumber is worth when it gets to the mill. So, you know, I think a lot of landowners are in a tough spot there. And of course, EQIP and CSP are not going to come anywhere near close to covering the cost of actually cutting down those larger trees. But let's see. So a couple other things with the payments with EQIP, you know, the payments are all based around the practices that are in your contract that you're going to implement. With CSP, because you're actually enrolling all of your land and it's really based more on having an existing level of conservation that you're doing, there's actually part of the payment is based on that existing conservation and maintaining that existing conservation. And then you also get part of the payment for new activities that you'll take on. And one of the unique things about CSP is that there aren't just what NRCS calls our conservation practices, but there are also these other sort of incentives or these other activities that sort of go above and beyond our basic practices. And one of them I mentioned briefly before is biochar production. We don't really have a payment rate for that with EQIP, but we do with CSP. If someone was actually going to do biochar production on their property, they could do that through CSP. And same thing goes, you know, with a lot of our other practices that go on croplands or rangeland. There's just sort of more innovative ways to do something with CSP that isn't really available with EQIP. Let's see, moving ahead, our eligibility. We do have eligibility criteria. We generally focus on working with people with working lands. And so with cropland, you know, that might be more obvious, but working lands for forest land would be someone who really has a forest management plan. Maybe you can sort of justify that there could be forest products that could be harvested. It could be mushrooms, it could be a Christmas tree, it could be materials to make a wreath out of. But that would be what you would need to show for forest land being sort of working lands. The applicant can be a person, a legal entity, an Indian tribe, or a joint operation that's engaged in agricultural production or forestry management. Federal, state, and county and local governments are not eligible for EQIP or CSP, but NRCS does have a lot of other programs which some of these other groups may be eligible for, different type of grant programs, or Amanda mentioned that RCPP, which is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And actually, several of the RCDs, several of the counties around here work together, and I think also with the Rebuild North Bay for this recent RCPP, which got awarded, but the funds aren't yet getting put out in a ranking pool and going out to the landowners yet, but it's coming within the next year. And I think it's several million more dollars just for this region that will all be for forest management, fuel reduction, grazing management. So the 200,000, per, every 6 months that Amanda mentioned with that one program is just, a small part of the money that's actually out there through all these different programs that you can use. The applicants do have to establish customer records and land control documentation with the USDA. The Farm Service Agency, which is our partner agency, actually manages all those records, but you can work with us at NRCS to turn in all the paperwork, and we forward that up to FSA. It's a lot of paperwork. There's usually mistakes. We usually send forms back, get them corrected. But once you get through that, the rest of the paperwork actually seems a lot easier. So if you can make it through the customer records, you're doing well. We do have some other eligibility criteria for adjusted gross income. Individuals and legal entities and the members of legal entities must certify that their average adjusted gross income is less than 900,000. It looks at the average over the last 3 tax years. And there is the potential for AGI waivers. I have not done that process yet, but I think someone really has to show that the project is just so important for the area or for the property that the government should be funding it, even though their AGI is above 900,000. We talked about a forest management plan a couple of times already, but it's a document that really guides the management and the goals for a property. And for NRCS contracts, all forestry practices must be installed according to a forest management plan. So they should be written about in the forest management plan, recommended for that property. There are several different types of FMPs, and NRCS can help write some of them. On unburned properties, we can write them for properties less than 50 acres. For burned properties, I think our state office says we could even write those up to 500 acres. If you have a larger property, then you would have to go the route of finding a registered professional forester to write the FMP. Last year, RCD and NRCS worked together to come up with a little flow chart to help people determine, which type of FMP they need. Do they need to hire the registered professional forester, or can they just work through our office? So the forest management plan is a document that guides the current and future management. It'll include a section that assesses the current conditions. We go out there and we do several forest inventory plots where we're measuring all the trees, writing what species there are they alive and dead. And so we'll include that. We'll talk about the species composition. We'll talk about what the average tree size is, the number of stems per acre, how dense is the stand. We also, as I mentioned, need to document that there's a potential for harvest of some type of forest products. We'll include the landowner management goals, and the conversations we have with you are really important in determining that. We also include the recommended conservation practices. It's not a timber harvest plan, though. If you do intend to actually harvest any timber products off of the property, you do have to have a different type of a plan. The conservation practices are the activities that we schedule and include in our contracts, and the payment rates are associated with specific scenarios for each of these. And we'll provide applicants with performance specifications for each project practice in their contract. because in the end, when we pay, it's based on that practice being implemented and meeting the NRCS standards and specifications. So some of these practices that we do often include for forest projects are the forest stand improvement, which is the cutting of selective trees. It could be just certain species. It's usually only trees up to a certain size. Most common, it's 8-inch diameter. Woody residue treatment is the practice that covers the actual management of all that debris. And I mentioned before, the forest stand improvement last year was paying $1,408 an acre. Woody residue treatment is much more variable, because if you're just doing lop and scatter and the property didn't burn, that's just around $100 an acre. If you're doing some chipping and burn piles, I think that's somewhere in the $200 to $300 an acre range. And if the property did burn, then you're getting more around $700 an acre for woody residue treatment, because there's so much more residue there. Tree shrub establishment is used if you need to plant trees, or even if there's naturally regenerating trees, but you want to protect them from deer browse, we can actually pay you to build cages around regenerating oaks or Doug firs or whatever it is, if they're getting damaged and you really want to encourage their success to reestablish that forest cover. We also have a practice for prescribed grazing, which can be using goats to come in and browse in the understory, eat the French broom, eat whatever the shrubby layer is that is increasing that wildfire hazard. We also have brush management, which would similarly be treating all the more brushy species like French broom.
But again, all of these have pretty low caps on them. So if I bring in goats to chomp down my property, how much would you all give per acre?
I think that with the goats, it's actually like $700 or $800 an acre, because that's an expensive service, and you can't just fence off 20 acres and set the goats free. If you're using that really intensive management one that pays that much, then you're doing your fencing, having someone come in and set up those temporary electric fences, probably temporary troughs and all that, just for a couple acres at a time to really get the goats to, munch everything in that area before they move to the next one. And that's the difference between the really intensive prescribed grazing versus just more prescribed grazing, where maybe you're rotating animals through pastures. And if you're just doing that, it only pays a couple dollars an acre. But if you have someone coming in and setting up that intensive grazing, it pays actually around $800 an acre.
Okay.
Brush management for more chemical control of French broom, that I think does just pay $100, maybe $200 an acre. And I want to say, someone had a question back just before Steve started talking, and I've now forgotten what it was. Does anyone remember who asked the question?
No, I'm paying attention to the questions. There's quite a few.
Yes, I did. I asked, if you have a contract and the property gets sold, what happens to your contract?
Okay, great question, because this is actually just coming up with a project I had, that it is actually, you should discuss that with the realtor. It's required that the new owner be given the option to take on the contract if they're an eligible participant themselves. And if not, I think you have to request cancellation. Worst case scenario, the state office could actually decide to terminate the contract if you didn't have a real reason, which I'm sort of struggling through this because I'm just having this happen for the first time. But you've lost control of the land, but it was sort of voluntary unless you sold the property due to something outside of your control. And if it's outside of your control, then you can request cancellation. If it was really more voluntary, then the state could choose to terminate your contract, where they can actually request some funds back from you. They can actually request 10% of the money that was originally obligated in your contract for you to pay back to NRCS. I'm not sure if this has ever happened before, but that would be the worst case scenario.
Okay.
But it's also a reason not to take on more than you think you can manage. Some people want to, I want to treat my whole property. Well, if your property is large, maybe you want to start with smaller sections. Also, our payment rates go up each year, so you don't want to commit to the payment rate at the year you first applied, when really maybe you want to come back 2 or 3 years later and say, okay, now I'm ready to do the next 50 acres. And if you're considering selling your property, you probably also don't want to go into a large contract. So landowner input, there is actually a lot of flexibility in how the conservation practices are implemented. And that's where landowner input is really crucial to determine what methods you're going to use. Are you going to target species? Is it handwork? Is it mastication? And also how you're managing that debris. Are you burning? Are you chipping? Are you mop and scattering? Are you building habitat piles? And so every site's different, and having those conversations and walking through the site with the landowner is important to develop a really good plan and a good project. And in the county, we've had, all types. We have some people who aren't interested in burning at all. We have some people who want to masticate, others who are just doing handwork. So there's a wide variety out there. The application process just starts with contacting us. We'll help you through that process of doing the paperwork and filling out the customer records. And then you'll fill out our application and officially apply for one of our programs. We'll work with you to develop that forest management plan if we can, or you may have to go the route of hiring a registered professional forester, but we'll come out there no matter what and do a site inventory ourselves and discuss, what your goals are. We'll also decide which conservation activities you want to include in the application and what extent those are, which part of the property are you going to focus in, how many acres, and how do you want to break that up into manageable treatment units so that you don't have to wait for the whole project to be done before you get paid. We'll rank the applications. It is competitive because we have different ranking pools and then only have so much money. But as I mentioned, the bulk of our forestry projects have been getting funded. So if selected, then we'll finalize all the contract documents for signature. We do have to do an environmental review on all of our projects. If federal funding is used, we have to make sure that there aren't negative effects on cultural resources, threatened and endangered species, essential fish habitat, or riparian areas. And worst case scenario here is that there could be avoidance areas. We could find a historic site or a prehistoric site and say that, well, in that 1 acre, you're not allowed to do anything, or you can only do handwork, absolutely no burning or ground disturbance. There's also frequently timing of implementation could be restricted due to bird nest season, especially with northern spotted owl. If you do have potential nest habitat for northern spotted owl, then you can't do any work starting February 1st through July 9th because that's their nest season. And so that's generally in areas that have over 65% canopy cover. They're dominated by conifer trees, maybe an uneven age stand. So you have, the really old trees, you have younger trees, you have just more of what would be the preferred habitat for northern spotted owl. We also look at a special database that shows where owl nest sites have been found in the past. And if it's within a 1/4 mile of that preferred habitat, there still could be restrictions there because the noise can cause owls to abandon their nests. The specifications will provide you with a copy of the implementation requirements and specifications you need so that you know how you're supposed to do the work to make sure that it meets our standards and specifications. And that's what we need to do before we can pay, because when we come out there to certify, we need to say that, yes, it did meet those implementation requirements that we gave you at the start of the project. When you get started, we might schedule a pre-construction meeting to come out and check in with you and the contractor you've hired, or check in with you if you're doing the work yourself. And we can also come out during construction if you have any questions. After the work is done, we certify and pay you for the work. There are some cases where you can get 50% of the money in advance of doing the work. If you are what we call a historically underserved applicant, which could depend on you being a beginning farmer, rancher, if you've only managed property for less than 10 years, if you fit certain socioeconomic groups, and you're a historically underserved applicant. And they actually get higher payment rates, about 25% higher than our regular rates. And they're eligible to get 50% of the funding in advance, but no sooner than 90 days before they expect to finish a chunk of work. And again, it's by sort of the treatment area or the payment unit. And that can really help because this work is so expensive. So if your contractor wants to be paid every week and we're not going to pay you till it's done, it helps to be able to get 50% of that up front. So if you have any questions, I have got my contact information here. RCD and NRCS are co-located. I didn't include all the RCD staff here because I couldn't fit them all on one page, but I do have the NRCS staff here. So myself, Evelyn Denzin, and then we've got Erica and Chip are a soil conservationist. We have an engineer, Liz Colby, as well as a biologist, Frank Bradley. And I will stop sharing, and I'm sure there's lots of questions in the chat I have been missing. Let's see.
Yeah. just talking about the expense, I think what might help is if the Steves could talk about their experience a little bit. One of the things, the first place I go to is, wow, I got to jump through a lot of hoops with you guys with these various grants to get, you know, $200 an acre. Is it worth it? You know, someone just wrote in, it was $12,500 to do an acre and a half. And I know when I did my property, I don't know, 4 years ago before the glass fire, thank heaven we did it. It was $5,000 an acre to get in and, you know, manually haul out all that undergrowth. And we did about, maybe 4 acres. And so part of it, I'd look at it and go, you know, if it's going to be $1,000 or $2,000 back, is it easier just go it alone? And I'd be curious to hear what Steve's experience is.
Elaine, I'll jump in and kind of follow up with that. But the first thing I want to say is that the staff at RCD, the staff at NRCS are fantastic, great people. So, you know, my comments, I mean, I'm working with Liz, I'm working with Erica, I'm working with Amanda, I'm sort of working with Amanda, but Bill Birmingham more. And the people are incredibly helpful. You know, Erica walked me through all the forms, filled out half the forms for me. They would really help you navigate the process. The problem is not with the staff and the helpfulness of the staff. The problem is fundamentally with the unrealistic rates and the amount of hoops that you have to go through and the regulatory issues. So for instance, you know, I mean, I've talked about the price issues. So you have to think long and hard, just as you said, Elaine, I think you're right. My experience, I've talked to many, many people, is that, you know, if you have relatively, if $5,000 is on the low side for treating an acre, meaning cutting down the brush that the ladder fuels and clearing the land in a way that a fire isn't going to just take off and be out of control. You have to get rid of that debris. And if you have rugged terrain, if you can't get equipment in there, if you can't get a chipper in there, if you have to do burn piles, if you have to haul things down the slope to be able to get them. I mean, a situation where the EQIP project, which just started, we started working, we're doing the clearing as we speak. I spent all day with CAL FIRE way up on the mountains, right below the Palisades, way on these back roads. We have to haul the debris almost a mile, pulling it by tractor. And we're talking about mountains of this stuff to get into a clear enough area that CAL FIRE will allow us to burn. They drove a fire engine all the way up almost to the Palisades today to look at it. And they only cleared 1 or 2 sites high up on the mountain where there was enough open area for us to be allowed to get a permit for CAL FIRE to do the burning. And there's no way you can get a chipper into that area. There's no other way to deal with it. So the problem are the unrealistic costs, I mean, the unrealistic reimbursements. Even though the EFRP program on paper says they reimbursed 75% of the cost and you pay 25%, what that means is that somehow somebody somewhere has established, and I have the rate structure that NRCS has in front of me, and you're right, there's woody residue in a fire area 728 per acre, 701 or something. It's 66 pages of treatments you have to go through, and you can stack them, but, you know, clearing out, you know, brush piles is 100, so you can add $100 per acre for, you know, some of certain things, and maybe you get up to $2,000. I trust Evelyn's done this a whole lot more than I have, so maybe if we're lucky and have the right condition, you know, pick the right practices and sort of have the right conditions, but you're not going to get up to, I mean, if you were paying 75 on $5,000, I mean, if they were paying 75 on $5,000, you would be getting, what, $3,750 or something like that. That of money. So even though the program talks in all the literature about paying 75% of the costs, what they're paying is what somebody fairly arbitrarily in some other part of the country perhaps has determined is 75% of what it should cost you to do, not what it actually costs you to do. So, I've talked with a dozen people who have gone through the application process, maybe not a dozen, but close to a dozen probably, neighbors and friends and so on. And very few of us have ever actually, I only know two people, myself and Dale Bleeker up at Jericho Canyon, who have actually pressed the start button on the EQIP grant. I'm doing EQIP because CAL FIRE decimated roads that I have. And actually, the road repair work pays better. And I'm able to do it with a pickup crew that's low cost and not a contractor. I got a volunteer bulldozer driver that I got to get insurance for, and I will do that work. And I'm actually able to use some of the money that I'm getting for the road work to cover costs that I'm not able to recoup on the brush work. And that passes muster. That's okay. If I do the work, it doesn't make much difference which bucket I come out with, as long as I've done the work to the specification required. For each of these specifications, so for woody residue treatment, the regulations, Evelyn can correct me, but I got maybe 40 pages or so, 50 pages of the specifications that I have to follow for doing, woody residue treatment. A lot of it's common sense, but a lot of it is very, very specific. So you have to do it to a high standard. So you can't just think that you're going to go and knock down some trees and get rid of what you want to get rid of and call it a day. You have to do a really high standard. And again, the staff are really, really helpful and I think somewhat forgiving. They're not going to ding you if you left a little bush standing somewhere in an acre and say, nope, you can't have the money because you got that bush standing. People are really cooperative. The staff is really terrific, but they're under some very, very stringent federal guidelines for this program. So I have started in EQIP. I started on Monday. I finally got funded I got the green light because the archaeologists had to determine that there were no possible artifacts in the areas that I was working on because I'm disturbing work. And we had to have, environmental review. And I have until March 12th. I think it's March 12th or March 15th to do the work. But then after that, it's bird season, nesting season, and I have to cease work until the summer. So I don't even have the winter. And then by the time we get to the summer, it's fire season. And I don't want people with chainsaws working in the woods during the height of fire season. I don't want any vehicles driven into the woods because of the danger of starting fires. So I have to stop until after fire season. And then, I only can work next winter. So it's very protracted. So the programs are excellent programs on paper, but the hurdles, the administrative hurdles, and because EFRP is now operating under the EQIP rules and the NRCS guidelines. I just found that out today, that in fact, that program is following the same guidelines. I mean, Bill didn't even know that when he was working on the property today. Mary Duggar, the state head of EFRP, because RCD, the local area has never actually had EFRP before, so everybody's figuring out the program. But the discouraging part is that the work is high. So if you have a lot of work that you're doing and you have to do the work anyway, and these costs, it is helping subsidize the work to a certain extent. But the expectation is, if I was giving somebody advice, I was saying, unless you're planning to do $30, $40, $50, $100,000 worth of work, you might expect to get 15% of the actual costs reimbursed if you're a participant in the EFRP or EQIP programs, but you're not going to actually, at the end of the day, get the work done to the standard that you need to get it done, even with the help, all the help that RCD and NRCS gives you. The actual costs are going to, you have to be prepared to foot the bill for, 80, 75, 60, the vast majority of the work that the cost that it's really going to take to clean up after this god awful mess. We have 800 acres here, 775 burned. So we're dealing with a big mess. We're only choosing little parts of the property to attack, but even that, we're being selective and trying to build safe corridors close to buildings that protect us and protect our neighbors also. And I'm working cooperatively with several of my neighbors and with the RCD staff on these programs. It is clear that the state office makes changes. A year ago after the fire, I read about EFRP and I said, this is perfect. On paper, it looked like exactly the program for us. And I went to the FSA, who's in charge of the program, although they'd never actually had a program here. And they told me we were not eligible because we were not a timber operation. It got booted all the way to the state. The state told me that we were not eligible because we didn't harvest timber on our property, even though there was nothing in the regulations that said we had to do that. I went to a congressman, not a congressman, local congressman, but not the one from our area, went to the Department of Agriculture, said, nope, you're not eligible because you didn't harvest timber. Then, surprisingly, I complained to everybody and wrote letters, and lo and behold, because I read the act that established the program, lo and behold, it turned out that the suspect is that the timber lobby up in Northern California had commandeered this program, and told us by state officials that they were wrong. We were all eligible for the program, and they actually misread the act, and that it was open to people who weren't commercial timber harvesting in their property. So they reversed themselves, and so the program was closed. I did a lot of the work before when they told me we weren't eligible, and now that work is not eligible for reimbursement. I'm kind of crying foul and saying, hey, wait a second, I went ahead and did the work anyway because we had to be safe. And now you open up the program and say, well, you can't get reimbursed for doing that work because you jumped the gun and you did it ahead of time. So the hurdles are many. And for many small property owners, as somebody who's gone through this, twice now, this process, be prepared for lots and lots of work, paperwork, and getting registration and doing the plans. You're going to be fortunate because the staff is wonderful in terms of supporting you through this, but it's not a quick way to get money, and it definitely in this area, from everybody that I know that has done this work, is only going to cover a small fraction of the work. So if you're prepared to wait, go through the paperwork and spend a lot of money, you'll get some partial reimbursement if you participate in this programs. But it's not going to be, you're not going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're going to get, unless you're doing, thousands and thousands of acres. Well, not thousands, but you got to do a lot. I would have to treat all 800 acres and make it look like something completely different if I were to try and get to those maximum amounts.
Got it. That's super, super helpful. Steve, the other Steve, do you?
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about your experience?
Well,
with this?
So we've applied for the EFRP last March, and essentially we're still waiting for a site visit, and the FSA has told us that I guess Amanda's actually in charge of that now. So we'll see. We still haven't got the site visit, but they don't fund anything before they get approval. So waiting for approval. But we've taken on work ourselves. In lieu of a chipper, I got a biochar ring, a ring of fire, and so we are burning up to 3-inch slash and residue from the fire. In that, Cal Fire said because it's a contained fire, they're not as concerned about it. We also had some open pile burns, and they really wanted to check those out as far as selecting the right site for burning those. And we have a lot of big logs, fir especially, that cannot be salvaged. The drought, 8 years of drought, had left internal checking, so if you tried to mill them, you'd probably only get about 30% yield. And I'm actually going to be looking into a CAL FIRE grant for getting a large-scale biochar unit on site for a month if I stage all the logs and have them burn it. But even though we technically are in approval, we still can't start on the forest. I'm also in the ECP program for the farm and the fencing and the irrigation and stuff. And as Steve Rasmussen stated, the prices are set on some strange national scale that doesn't reflect what is being done. We were hoping to get paid 75%, but we're nowhere near that on recovery of funds. Even though we've got our designated payout, we haven't finished all the work yet, but our irrigation's back up and going. A lot of our stuff doesn't fit into a standard profile because the farm profiles are more set towards, I'd say, open land farms or dairy or something, but vineyards, it doesn't. The cost of irrigation and running drip through vines and stuff is much more than what they're used to paying. So anyway, my experience was we still have a lot of work to do, but like Steve said, you got to be prepared to pay and take on quite a bit yourself.
Cool.
Evelyn, I'd like to, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking at, practice 384. I got the rate sheet, lop and scatter, $85 an acre. Replace it with a biochar, you get another $100 and some dollars an acre. So, lop and scattering a debris on an acre for $85. Not. Am I wrong about how the rates? I'm looking at the NRCS rates.
No, the lop and scatter is really low, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You figure you cut a tree down with one cut, and then to lop and scatter it into like the 30-inch sections that this NRCS standard says it has to be in is, dozens more cuts. So it's absurd that the rate's so low. There is a biochar practice that's within the CSP program that actually pays a couple $1,000s an acre. I have to talk more with our state forester about how that would be used. The only person I had interested in using that, it was more where it was a small stand of eucalyptus where there's a whole lot of debris in a small acre where they want to do that. I don't know how they would use that to apply across, potentially dozens or hundreds of acres of forest land that had a lot of large diameter trees that could potentially be, burned and produced into biochar.
Right. Well,
But
like in practice 384, replacing open pile burning with air curtain burner or biochar, it adds $102. You get $102 per acre. For biochar, Steve, you get $122 an acre.
yeah, and there's a different payment schedule that shows the CSP
per acre. Huh? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say there's a different payments schedule that shows the CSP payments that would be different for biochar.
Yeah, but
that one on EQIP probably isn't isn't worth it. It may be more for someone who's going to take their orchard prunings and turn them into
Right.
biochar, but not necessarily for forestry.
But according to Mary, EFRP is following the NRCS guidelines and using the same rate structure as EQIP. So the EFRP program is going to give you $102 per acre for biochar. Well, you know, you can't, you know, that's we're talking about trivial amounts of money for the kinds of treatment areas, sizes that I think everybody in this phone call is talking about. People are talking about, you know, if you have 5 acres you're doing, you get $500 after all is said and done. I mean, the sad part is that your staff is spending many more than $500 worth of hours bill mapping all these things and going through the plans and all the paperwork. It's hours for me, but for every hour I spend, the RCD staff is spending 5 or 10, you know, hours before the work even starts. So, you know, I say all this because I think as a collectively, we can raise a little hell with people like Mike Thompson and others to give us realistic rates for doing this work. The intent of the program are right and good. The staff who are working are diligent and knowledgeful and hardworking and wonderful support, but the dollars are so unrealistic. It's really pretty ludicrous. You know, I told Mary, it's kind of an insult to those of us that have suffered the consequences of this catastrophes and had our properties burned, to be told that this is what the government is able to help us with, and the government calls it help, you know, calls it assistance. So
I'm sorry, Steve. I don't know what else to say. Sorry that we.
You guys are terrific. No, I'm not directing this at all. You know, I can't say often enough as much. You know, I can't say enough good about the work that all of you are doing on this kind of thing. I just want people to be really realistic about what it is, because it's a lot of work that I've been. You know, I spent a lot of time investigating what these programs were available, and I've gone through the process. So it's not. I'm participating. I'm working hard to do it, but my eyes have been opened by, you know, being by a participant. And what my goal is to do is to participate, but to also be an advocate for increasing the amounts of money and resources that is being brought to, you know, bear on this from the federal level, from the state level, and other kinds of things, so that there's more assistance that flows through your office, and that you're able to offer people more assistance, not less, because you're doing the work. You should be able to give people more for the work that you're doing. They deserve it. You deserve it, in terms of, you know, all of the work that you have to put in, and you have to put the work in, even if people don't wind up doing it. If they say no at the end of the day, you've still done all that work to help us get set up for it. And some people have gone through that work and then opted out. You've had to do the plans and show them the amount that they're going to get, and they say, I don't want to do it.
May I make a comment?
Please.
So I think one of Steve, thank you very much for sharing your experience. It's maybe more valuable than anything else because it's practical. It's what actually happens. And obviously, thank you, ladies, for bringing what is available to all of our attention. I can only speak for myself. I haven't been back here. I grew up here, but I haven't been back here but for about 10 years. And one of the things that I see evolving is the expectation around a lot of people who are relatively new to the area that the forest is just going to take care of itself. As hourly rates, or as the availability of labor has become relatively tight, it becomes almost impossible, unless you can do the work yourself, to afford to have it done. When I first started having this kind of work done, I could find guys that were willing to do it for $15, $20 an hour. nobody is willing to work for that amount of money anymore. And the work is incredibly physically demanding. I mean, you have to be in some kind of condition, or after a few days, you have to take a break. It's always steep. I can't speak to Mr. Rasmussen's property, but it's always steep. It's at relatively high altitudes. If you're not conditioned, that can be harder on you than you might imagine, especially if you're new to it. And you're working with equipment through terrain where there's nowhere to stand. So if you're doing it yourself, it's unbelievably slow. And I think the appropriate response here is not so much to figure out how we can get these small amounts of money, but to pool together and see if we can exert some political influence on someone who has the power to say, hey, look, you know, we're in trouble too. I know that we look really wealthy because our properties are worth a lot of money, but most of us don't have big piles of money to spend on projects that can't self-liquidate. So these are the almost definition of non-self-liquidating projects. There's no way that you're going to get enough money back from it to make it economically viable. It's going to, if you do it, create a continued need for repeat treatment. You can't just leave it that way. Small stuff grows up. You have to go through every few years and cut it back down. A lot of the forestry regulations are so restrictive that they almost are anti-appropriate forestry management. You want to leave the biggest trees you can as far apart as possible and discourage the growth of everything else so that when fire comes, it's less likely to spread easily. If I understand it correctly from the guys that I hired to tell me that. So leaving 8-inch trees everywhere is going to result in an incredible increase in fire danger, particularly if you do have areas where there aren't big trees or areas where there aren't big open areas under your canopy. So I think that's just my 2 cents. Number one, this seems way too complicated. Number two, it seems pornographically expensive to landowners, and we should, as people who pay taxes in some of the most expensive counties in the country, we should talk to our elected representatives and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, we all pay into the system. We're having a serious problem. There are fires now every year. We're going to need a little help just to make sure the whole thing doesn't burn down again. And see what they say. I mean, I don't have anybody particular in mind, and I don't have much of a political voice, but I'm sure somebody on this call knows someone and is maybe can put it in a more articulate way than I can put it, and can say to them, we're in real trouble. If it all burns down, the tax base goes up in smoke, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only so much of it you can do by yourself. I mean, there's only so much of it. I think Steve outlined that really eloquently. They don't want you cutting trees certain times of years because of owls. Nobody wants inexperienced people working with chainsaws when it hasn't rained. You can only burn under very specific conditions where there's no chance the fire will spread. So the time is limited. If you're doing it yourself, you can barely just keep everything stable.
Well, we are looking at we'll see, a potential tax that could give us large amounts of money for the county to be able to spend on fuel load reduction. So we'll see how that might, you know, kind of what happens. So.
For Evelyn and Amanda, you know, I think a practical suggestion that I would make, because I had to get the rate schedule from Mary Duggar, and would be to actually, before you get very far with people, sit down with people with your rate schedule and really go through with them and talk about the treatments and how much it pays, because I think you would save a lot of work because there would be a lot of people. I didn't, you know, I don't get the way the process works right now. You don't get the estimate of how much you're going to give until after all the analysis has been done. But if I had just seen the rate schedule that you were working off of, I might have said, you know what, it's not going to be worth it. Thanks a lot for coming and talking to me about this, but this isn't going to work for us. And I think the way the process is, and you can share that. It's a public document. Mary had no problem sending it to me. It's so many pages, but you could walk people through it. I highlighted on this thing, and I'll share it. I'll share it with you, Elaine, and anybody else that maybe, you know, the Firewise Foundation can pass it out. But, you know, for EFRP, there are only, you know, there are about 40 of the practices that they actually allow. And so I'm highlighting all of those in the 64 pages. And then you can go through and see what it pays, you know. So for instance, you know, we talked about reseeding areas that were burned. Well, you get, you know, I forget what it is. The amount you get is less than the native grass seeds to do it, right? So didn't even pay for the seeds to do it. Everything else, the spreading straw, all the kinds of things that had to be done. So that would be a suggestion, to share that information up front with people, make it available, have a little smaller, you know, get rid of all of the ones that don't really, that nobody's going to do. We're not going to be spraying chemicals from airplanes, you know, on our properties and stuff like that. So, you know, get rid of all of those, simplify that, and share that as part of your presentation, so people up front are aware of and can make a decision about the efficacy of the program for them based on what the reimbursements are.
We usually do that for EQIP. I know we wouldn't have done it for EFRP because we really weren't involved in that aspect of it. But Erica and I usually do provide an estimate with, you know, with the plan before we even get to ranking and, you know, selection of an application. We usually do try to provide an estimate.
Yeah, we do the same with the NBFIP. The EFRP one has been a really interesting experience. I know it's sort of Mary's first time like doing this and in this area, and it's a new process, and we are all very much learning as we go. And we just had a conversation with a forester out of Washington, DC to make sure that we were still following all of the like necessary things about it. But there's been oh man, I don't know exactly how to phrase this, so no one take this to the bank, but there's been a sort of strange, like, they want us to come at it from a sort of purely scientific vantage. And so they have been reluctant to share things like pay schedules and timelines at the stage. And as Steve says, it is publicly available, at least the pay schedules, but like, they don't want, there's been this notion that we should be evaluating the project as the work that needs to get done, and not actively trying to coach people into like the most reasonable response. And we've been pushing against that, and it's still a little bit of a thing. Steve's points are monumental, and we need so much more like focus on this area, because these are not one-shot problems that once Steve is done this time, he will be done forever. As we all know, this stuff regrows. So one of the other foci that we have is a workforce development program, and it is, you know, tadpole stages, egg stages. But another grant we have is talking about, you know, getting workforce development, and Santa Rosa Junior College has a program now where they are actively recruiting and educating people who can go out and be on, you know, hand crews, because we recognize that there is a huge just dearth of people who can do this kind of work. And that is, you know, basic economics. One reason why this is all insanely expensive is because their crews are just, they're short, there aren't that many, and they can charge what they want because there's not enough competition for it. So that's my little environmental economics soapbox, and I'll hop off it. I see a hand raised, by the way.
I was going to say, and there's also, we've connected some of the folks up on Diamond Mountain with a forester out of Lake County and Fort Bragg area who was able to get salvage on Douglas fir and redwood. And there was enough salvage value in that they could, you know, they could afford to take it all down. It was basically that it equaled each other out. And we're happy to share, you know, resources and names if anybody needs these. Just pop us something in the chat and I can share those. And then I think there were some questions.
I see Pam Morris has a hand raised.
If Pam Morris, are you on?
Yeah, I had to figure out the unmute button. Thank you. I don't want this to be off topic. It is about forestry. I know we're mostly talking about money and reimbursement for fire damage. The PG&E guys are just butchering a lot of the old trees. They've brought in these guys from out of state that get paid for cutting, and they're just doing some horrible forestry decisions that are going to affect, big trees that should not be cut, that are not damaged, and also erosion problems. As forestry people, and this does tie into not having more fires because of the way these are being done, who can we have oversee these PG&E butchers?
I wish I had an answer for that question. I don't know if any of you logged on to the Napa County Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday morning. There was a rather long session where PG&E, presented what they're doing and why, and then a much longer session of people, many from the Mount Veeder area, talking about how horrific what they were seeing and experiencing is. And everything Pam said, that just, it feels like the wrong things are happening. Unfortunately, I had to log off. I had another meeting before if the Board of Supervisors responded in any way, I don't know. PG&E is acting outside of state minimums. So I think that's the best way to start that approach, is to sort of rein them back in. The state minimums exist because they were, guidelines created by natural resource professionals, and Lord knows where PG&E's guidelines came from. So that would be my recommendation. And I would certainly start with the County Board of Supervisors, your supervisor again, and, squeaky wheel it, because none of us are in charge of PG&E or have any say in how or what they do.
So the impact on forest, that doesn't come under your purview at all.
I mean, neither Evelyn nor I are regulatory agencies in any way. We offer technical advice, and we, can go out and tell you and the PG&E contractors that, this redwood tree is not dead and is not in danger of the lines, but I have no power to get them to stop.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Pam, can I tell you something? Because I've had all kinds of conflicts with PG&E around my property, and you're right, they absolutely always make a mess, and they have a tendency to cut the wrong trees down. I go when they're cutting and take pictures of their truck and their license plates and find whoever's in charge and get their name and say, these are trees that are not to be cut down. These are the trees. And you have to be reasonable. I mean, if it's touching the power line, or if it looks like a strong wind blows, it's going to fall on the power line. That's one thing. But they have a tendency just to get carried away, and they never want to cut, in my experience, the really technical, awful stuff that's leaning towards the power line. They'll leave stuff like that and cut down things that don't, in my understanding of how it works, provide much of a threat to the line.
They're yahoos from out of state that get paid by how much they butcher and cut. They're not paid for making the right decision. They're just paid for just slash and burn cutting. It's right. So they're from out of state. They don't care.
Document it. Like, take pictures of it with your camera and make sure you find out who was there on what day and who did what, because you may not be able to close the loop fast enough to get the guys who are there. But once they know you're watching them that closely, their behavior changes quite a bit. And I've noticed that once they realize that you're looking at it and that you have their phone numbers, you're going to be calling them or you're going to be making noise, then they're a little less reckless. That's what I've found.
Thank you.
Pam, another suggestion is to make sure you ask them what scope, what PG&E program they're cutting under, because there was the fire scope, things that were damaged by the fire, endangering the lines because of the glass fire. There is the EVM smoke, environmental vegetation management, which is the long-term scope. There's a routine scope, and each of those has a different manager. So for instance, I have on my cell phone, Daniel McBride. He's in charge of EVM in this whole region for PG&E. I have his mobile phone. I call him right to the top, but he only is in charge of EVM. So if they're there for routine scope, that's somebody else. If they're there for fire scope, that's somebody else. You have to work in these silos for with PG&E, and you have to really understand their system and who to go to, because it's a huge organization that is very dysfunctional.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any other good questions here? I've been sending out a few contacts for folks who need them. Do we have any other questions within our group? I know I see some faces. Fred Seavey, I was at Seavey last week picking up some wine for the DOT event. Thank you for the donation. It was great. Okay, I don't know if we have any more questions. Evelyn and Amanda and Steve, you guys are awesome. Evelyn and Amanda, thank you so much. Thank you for presenting. Thank you for patiently holding our hands as we wade through these, these complex programs. I think the interesting thing is no one's going to do this for us. We've all got to really manage it ourselves. There's no magic bucket of money out there to help rescue us. I think when I started getting involved in fire, I really looked up and was like, wow, we kind of, we got to figure it out. And which is good. I mean, it just is what it is. So.
Yeah, I want to add one last thing that I'd say, in all the fires last year, 2 properties I went to who had done management before the fires, I mean, they looked great. They had green leaves left on their oak trees. Their oak trees did not get torched and die. They'd kept the Doug firs out from under their oaks. They'd kept the brush out, and it made a difference. And yes, there's the maintenance. You can't just do it once. But if you do put that effort in, you can have a really beautiful woodland or forest.
Oh, it's huge. The area that we did our work on around my house all, saved my home. And then the forest now totally bounced back. It's not burned. And there's a guy, Larry Rugoff, who I like to work with, who's been great. And he lost 500 acres in the lake fire about 4 or 5 years ago. And I asked him, he's a forester, and I said, so how long does it take before this grows back? And I'm thinking 20 years. And he said, oh, it can take 100 years before this returns to the forest health that it was. So it is so much better for us to get in there and haul out the brush and do the shaded fuel breaks and have this stuff be healthy. From a replant perspective, it's sort of one of those ounce of prevention is a pound of cure moments. It's pretty huge. So
the one parting thing I want to say too, and this is not grant program necessarily, but for the curious and those interested in learning, because it is a huge learning process for people who are not, forestry is not their background. UC Cooperative Extension Program has a great forest stewardship workshop program. I've helped with a couple. I participated in one in Berkeley back when we could go places and do things and be in the same classroom as people, and it is fabulous. They are doing them online now, so you can access whichever one is happening next. I'm pretty sure there's one coming up. It's a pretty nominal fee. I want to say like $60 registration fee. There's a field day at the end of it. I know Fred Seavey did it. I see Gretchen nodding her head. It's just such a great and informative program, and they really do try. And they give you, you get a registered professional forester site visit to your property at the end. So
it's a terrific class. Dunning, Dyer, and I from the Diamond Mountain Fire Safe Council took it this summer. And it was so incredibly informative. They're so well organized and multiple different lectures. It's great. You go back to college, but there's no tests, and you learn all about how to create a plan for your property and just so much more. And because they're doing it on Zoom, it's totally accessible to all of us who live in these remote places. Yeah, and you get a forester to come to your property for a quick consultation to help you start your forestry management plan, your property management plan. So super worthwhile. I highly recommend it.
Great.
UC Berkeley Ag Extension.
I dropped a link to it in the chat.
Excellent.
Just to the big, like, stewardship.
Yeah. Forestry stewardship class for private landowners. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a lot just like being healthy, and it's also interesting. I found it's a lot of the same kind of principles that apply to grape growing. Not too many vines per acre, not too many trees per acre. They need a certain amount of nutrients. They need a certain amount of water. They need a certain amount of sun to be healthy. And you can't just sort of let it all go feral because it won't be happy. So, okay, anything else? Everyone, thank you hugely. I know we've got a couple more. I can't remember. I think we have the next meeting planned. We may have content for that already figured out. If not, that may be a meeting for Eric to talk about what he's got cooking. And we're going to do more and more of these experience shares, because I think having practical information, you guys can use practical people from, Amanda and Evelyn, practical people who can help us all. That's huge. And we'll just keep getting it out there so we can all keep getting safer. And then let us know too, we're talking about an FSC lead retreat, possibly all meeting, because I know you all want to get to know each other, and sharing information back and forth. I think that would be really helpful. And then also, if people are interested in field trips out to see some of these other projects, please ping us. And we'll see about setting up some interesting field trips to see what people are doing. And then we'll keep sharing resources. And anything else y'all have, please ask. We're all in this together.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks you guys. And thanks Amanda, Evelyn, and the Steves. Really appreciate your coming and sharing your time and expertise with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thanks for hosting.
Is that you, Sherry? I think Sherry has unstable internet. Okay.
For you to contact me if you want more information.
Yeah, we'll follow up with you, Sherry. You're I think you're trying to Wi-Fi call and your internet's not strong enough. So we'll ping you. Okay. Thanks, everyone.